Vancouver is one of the rainiest cities in North America, and as climate change accelerates, extreme weather events such as heavy downpours, flash flooding, and prolonged droughts are becoming more frequent. But now the stakes are even higher. But what if we worked with the rain instead of against it? In one Vancouver neighborhood, a community had a bold vision: to daylight a lost creek and reimagine how water interacts with urban infrastructure. The result? The St. George Rainway project, an innovative approach to urban green landscapes that integrates into the fabric of the city, cooling streets, preventing erosion, and restoring biodiversity. Today, I'll explore how this community-driven project didn't just transform an outdated water system, it set a model for how grassroots initiatives can work hand-in-hand with municipalities, creating a framework that other communities can follow for lasting, systematic change. I'll talk to people who made that happen, from an architect who conceived the plan to the community advocates who helped turn this innovative vision into a reality. Stick around for today's episode of From Grey to Green. Our cities are changing. Climate challenges are forcing us to rethink the way we live and interact with the land. But the most innovative solutions aren't coming from the top down. They're being built from the ground up, with grassroots communities leading the way. Proving that working with nature isn't just possible, it's essential. These aren't just environmental projects, they're blueprints for the future. Join me, Paul Gregory, from Nature Canada, as I travel across the country to meet people who are making it happen. From conservation groups, climate groups, and naturalists, to everyday citizens turning big ideas into real change. This is From Grey to Green. Vancouver is a city shaped by water. It's surrounded by oceans, carved by rivers, and defined by its rainfall. On average, it sees over 160 rainy days a year. But in an urban landscape built on pavement and concrete, that rain has nowhere to go. Instead of nourishing the land, it rushes off of rooftops and streets, overwhelming storm drains, carrying pollution straight into the ocean, impacting fish habitats and more. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if the rain could flow as it once did, supporting ecosystems instead of overwhelming them? That's exactly the question a group of Vancouver residents, consisting of local nature groups, artists, and urban designers asked when they set out to create the Rainway, a community-driven project that reimagines how cities and nature can work together. Today, I'm in Vancouver, where architect Bryn Davidson and a group of local advocates have turned an old idea into a bold project that doesn't just manage water, it redefines the way we think about our urban environment.
I'm Bryn Davidson. I am lead designer at Lane Fab Design Build. So we are a residential design and construction company, specifically with a green focus, mostly in Vancouver. I went to UBC for architecture school. Before that, I grew up in California and did my undergraduate degree in engineering in California. When I went to architecture school, I went with a specific intent of focusing on green building systems. So there's always been an abiding interest in energy systems and water systems and materials and all of these kind of things in everything.
When Bryn first came to Mount Pleasant neighborhood, where the St. George Rainway now exists, he saw something that most people had forgotten: a lost creek buried beneath the streets. And he asked a simple, profound question: what if we brought it back?
Well, I mean, for many years, I was very interested in the idea of creek daylighting. So daylighting is when you take a creek that's buried in a pipe and you dig it up so that water is back in the daylight once again. In 1905 or whatever, they came and they put the creek into a pipe and buried it and built the city over it. The way that we built cities for many years, that was kind of oblivious to that. We just kind of imported ideas. We just put all the rain down in big sewer pipes and kind of ignored it. Basically, all the creeks were buried. You know, the ravines were filled in. All the rainwater was put into stormwater pipes. And in most cases, the stormwater pipes were mixed with the sewage pipes. And you get a big rain event and all the water hits those sidewalks and driveways and roofs and roads and flushes like a big giant sort of tidal wave into the sewer where it mixes with poop and then, overflows into the creeks. There's been kind of a relearning process there of trying to figure out how to work with the rain instead of just trying to corral it and fight against it. In some cases, they've been able to dig that back up, bring it back to the daylight and restore that creek function. So that kind of creek daylighting was always something that was kind of beautiful to me because it was about a restorative act of urban design.
Before urban neighborhoods like St. George, nature had a way of handling all its rain. The forests, wetlands, and soil acted like a giant sponge, slowing water down, filtering it, and giving it time to seep into the earth before eventually finding its way into creeks, rivers, and eventually the ocean.
I think it was around 2004. I was working on my architecture thesis, and I was working on a campus area called the Great Northern Way campus, which is in Vancouver. That whole area used to be an intertidal wetland back in the day. There's pictures of it, people in canoes, whatever, which is now called False Creek Flats. Now it's a big industrial area and a rail yard. But I was looking at that area and kind of just walking around the neighborhood, trying to understand how that area connected to the surrounding community. And in that process, as I'm walking down St. George Street, I hear this rushing water sound, and I'm like, what is that? And I look at the manhole of the storm sewer, and I can hear the water just rushing. This is in the middle of summer. It hasn't rained for a week or two. I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Where the heck is this coming from? What I started to do was to look up a map of the city's stormwater mains and looking at how it's actually connected to the rest of the city in kind of hidden ways that we don't see. What we started to think about was whether we could take that idea of creek daylighting, but do it in an urban setting along the route of a street with an existing storm sewer with its existing kind of micro watershed.
It's an idea that feels both simple and radical. What if we brought a creek back that once ran through this neighborhood? At first glance, it makes perfect sense. It's not just about keeping rainwater out of the storm drains. It's about restoring a natural system that cities have nearly erased. A nature-based climate solution that will allow rain to soak into the earth, filtering through soil, replenishing groundwater, and eventually flowing back into the creeks, rivers, and oceans. A system that will prevent floods, support wildlife, and shape the land itself. But in a city where streets, sidewalks, and buildings now cover the landscape, how do you bring back a creek that no longer has a place to flow?
It's very hard to bring a full creek right in the middle of the city. Having an idea is fine, but operationalizing it is where it becomes something real. So that's where the community effort was really important. The community kind of formed around that idea, and it's really because of that community that something came of it. There's a lot of convincing of neighbors and convincing the city to take us seriously, to then get engaged, to then get it into the long-term plan and actually get the funding and get it built.
Big ideas rarely take shape on their own. Even the most forward-thinking, nature-based climate solutions don't just happen because they make sense on paper. They happen because people rally behind them, because the community sees value in the vision and pushes to make it a reality.
We were just sort of slowly chatting with people, getting them to think about the history underneath their feet that they're walking on. You can hear the stream running underneath, even though it's piped into sewers and all of that.
This is Rita Wong, a community member of the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. Rita, who's a poet, an environmental advocate, saw the Rainway as more than an infrastructure project. To her, it was a story, a way to reimagine how people experience their surroundings. She and others started hosting events, writing and speaking about the lost water systems beneath their feet.
We had a gathering at the Native Education College, which is in their neighborhood, with Bryn, with Bruce McDonald, who's a local historian, done lots of walks around the city looking at the critical infrastructure, by which I mean the natural infrastructure that was here. And out of that, we just organically evolved. So we did different things. We had a block party. We did a mural along the Rainway Street on St. George above where the creek actually is. And that was a really fun experience. Got a lot of people in the neighborhood involved. It's right along a elementary school. So we were talking with the elementary school teachers and the principal, and also an acknowledgement that the stream would have been called Testetlu in the language of the Hunkaneana-speaking people. So in our neighborhood, we have a annual fair that's held at the elementary school. It's called Mount Pleasant Days. So we always had a booth there every summer. So it was partly a process of just following our hearts and meeting other people in the neighborhood who are stream lovers and creek lovers and nature lovers. And this was a really beautiful way to get to know our neighbors. It was a pretty organic, I would say, and joyful process. But it was also a process that was limited in terms of what a little neighborhood group can do. And so we realized that if we wanted it to scale up, that we had to at some point approach the city and ask the city to implement this and make it happen.
The St. George Rainway started as a community vision, an idea shaped by people who wanted to see nature return to their neighborhood. But to make it real, to move beyond an idea into something that can actually be built, the project had to speak the language of the city. A nature group advocating for creek restoration is one thing, but getting a municipality to sign on, that takes something else.
If you're working in the city, you've got to have layers of function. If it had just been a nature strategy, it would have died. Because the straight up environmental argument, you're going to reach a niche of people, but you're not going to have the kind of broad influence that maybe you want to. The layering of things on St. George Street really spoke to me as saying, like, this is the place where this first example could happen. You need those different constituencies and agendas coming together and supporting each other. So if you want something to succeed, that climate value or biodiversity value has to kind of overlap with some of these other things, or at least the way it's talked about has to overlap.
So what does this mean? It means that for a project like the Rainway to succeed, it just can't be about restoring nature. It has to be about building a better city. And that's the key. The most successful nature-based climate solutions, especially those focused on climate resilience, don't just solve environmental problems. They make the overall quality of life better. They overlap with things that people care about every day: affordability, safety, transportation, comfort. And when that happens, nature-based climate solutions aren't just about nature. They gain momentum with municipalities, they reach more people, and become part of the way we design cities. Not as an exception, but as a new normal.
Everybody has such great ideas and so many different visions of what they want to see the Rainway being. Working on the lens from the city, you start to realize how much, as you have competing infrastructure, you have accessibility guidelines, like a lot of things limit you in terms of the design. So it can be challenging to kind of bring the vision that the community wants to life as wholesomely as they would hope, because of where we have barriers and limitations in terms of what we can do within the existing infrastructure and within the right-of-ways.
Julie McManus works for the City of Vancouver and was a direct liaison between the community and the municipal process, helping to define what projects like the St. George Rainway needed in order to move from concept to construction.
I think it was really, really important, all the foundational work that the St. George Rainway group did to get the community on side for some large changes. I really think that it's important that community groups get involved early. Sometimes I think cities kind of hold off to engage until they have a stronger concept. But by then, I think it's often too late to really get meaningful kind of input and collaboration into a design.
So what I'm learning here is that it's simply not enough to say a project is good for the environment. It also has to make sense within the city's existing framework, how it impacts transportation, how it integrates with utilities, and how it functions within the needs of the community.
There was always this idea of using design, using the rainbow landscape as a teaching opportunity to kind of co-design the neighborhood. So that's kind of been the goal from the beginning. And so what you end up with is what I see as a new type of urban infrastructure that brings together stormwater function, public space, biodiversity and habitat, learning opportunities for kids.
While the Rainway may have started as a community-led vision, turning this vision into reality meant understanding something critical. Nature-based solutions don't exist in isolation. In a city, every project has to fit within the broader system of infrastructure, policy, and urban planning.
I really don't think we would have seen as much space taken from the street to be put back to an urban nature had it not been for that foundational work done by the Safeguard Rainway Group over decade that they advocated and engaged and educated and championed the idea.
What gave this project its energy, I think, is the involvement of children. And obviously the kids are not implementing all of this, but they had a lot to tell us and share with us. And I think that it was a really engaging, but also informative. Like, we all learned a lot through the process. We really need to focus on the health of the lands, which is our health.
So I started working on this 20 years ago. Now my kid is a 5th grader at Mount Pleasant Elementary, right next to this. So he has been learning about the Rainway since he was in kindergarten, something I would have never thought about 20 years ago when I didn't have a kid. I think right now it's been interesting because I live in the neighborhood. I walk by there almost every day and I can watch the process. You see the water pouring over the little berms. You can hear the water, flowing down one pipe and coming up another pipe. And it's quite dynamic in a way that I was hopeful for.
So as I walk around the St. George Rainway, I see a success story of a nature-based climate solution that isn't just about water management or conservation. It's about rethinking how cities and nature coexist. The Rainway isn't a return to the past. It's a model for the future. A project that takes a beautiful idea, daylighting a creek, but reimagines it to fit the modern city. It works because it doesn't just solve an environmental problem, it makes life better for those who live here. It's a pedestrian route, a gathering space, and a cooling corridor on hot summer days. It's a place where rain is no longer something to get rid of, but something that moves through the neighborhood naturally, feeding native plants and supporting biodiversity. And maybe most importantly, it's proof that when local nature groups, designers, city planners, and municipal officials work together, real change is possible. The St. George Rainway didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took over a decade. And it didn't happen without challenges, but it did happen. And as more cities look for ways to adapt to a changing climate, this project stands as a real blueprint for what's possible when nature is built back into urban life. This is From Grey to Green, a Nature Canada production. If you'd like to learn more or would like to get involved, visit naturecanada.ca.